Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Mem Hey. This week's learning is sponsored by Sarah Galasco in loving memory of her mother-in-law, Carol Galasco, Chaya Bat Avram Michael Vifega Liba. I wish everyone could be blessed with as wonderful a mother-in-law as I have had. Baruch Dayan Emet. Today's daf is dedicated in honor of the release of Agam Berger, Arbel Yehud, Gadi Moses, and five Thai hostages after 482 days in captivity. May we see the speedy release of all the rest of the hostages. And today's daf is dedicated in memory of the 67 victims of the tragic aircraft collision in Washington. Okay, with that, we will get started. One announcement I want to, or maybe even two announcements. We started a Learn Megillah campaign specifically in Hebrew for high school students. So if you know anyone who wants to join, you can have them join. It started on Tuesday, but since we're not doing Friday and Shabbat, they can catch up. If anybody else wants to learn Megillah before Purim, so you're welcome to. You can do it from our site. You just can go with the pages and go click on Megillah, Daf Bet, Gimel Daled. We're not going to have a big campaign this year, but everyone's welcome to learn. It's a great idea. If you start now, you have time with a little bit of extra wiggle room to finish before Purim. Okay, and also Rabbanit drives the Shiur in Hebrew is starting this coming Wednesday. So if anybody wants to join, it's a class in Hebrew meant to improve your skills, your Gemara skills, and delve in depth more into these topics. And with that, we will get started. Okay, starting with the Mishnah. Right, sometimes we run programs in English, sometimes in Hebrew. We had Gila Fine's Shiur, but it was only in English, so you have to balance. Okay, we're going to start with the Mishnah. We're really going to get into the nitty-gritty details. We're going to start with stripping them of their clothing. It's going to be a little bit of an unpleasant sugya, the first section. There's a study guide for today. I recommend you use it particularly for the first section of today because it's going to be a bit of a back and forth, and to keep in mind who says what. The chart will help a little bit. Okay, we're continuing. If you remember, we talked already a few times. These are descriptive Mishnayot, like in Yoma, like in Psachim. Okay, we haven't learned Bikurim together, but Bikurim also has that when we talk about bringing the first fruits to the temple. So there's a whole slew of Mishnayot that are these descriptive that really get into, and they want you to feel like it's hard for us because we keep stopping because we read the Mishnah and then we move on to the Gemara, then we read the Mishnah. But if you read this and in fact, this Mishnah particularly highlights it, which I wanted to mention it now. Remember, the last Mishnah says, or even if we go back, we started at the Beit Hadin. Then we said, well, there was a distance to get from the court to the Beit HaSkila where they're going to stone the person. Then it said, right, in order to have the people waving and then the horse and all that, in order to give them time for people to come forward and say, we have a reason to exonerate. Then we said the last mission was when they're 10 cubits away, like you feel like you're walking along with them. When you're 10 cubits away, they do the vidoy, the confession. Now our Mishnah starts off when they're 4 cubits away, right? Which we know 4 cubits is like the space of a person. So you're almost there. Mafshitimoto epigadav. They strip the person of their clothing. Now, the reason for this, it sounds a little bit unpleasant. The reason is actually for the best interest of the person getting killed, because we want to make the death quick, and the less friction there is, the quicker they're going to die. Ha'ish mechasino to milifanav. Now, they don't strip you naked entirely. I mean, they do, but then they cover up the man from the front. Ha'isha. Okay, now we see they also strip the women. Milifaneha u'me'achareha. There they covered her both in the front and in the back. We'll get into a drop more detail about how much they covered her in Braita. We're going to quote as soon as we finish the Mishnah. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. This is Rabbi Yehuda. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, both the man and the woman get stripped. Just the woman gets covered in the front and the back, and the man gets covered only in the front. Chachamim omrim ha'ish niskal aram ve'ein ha'isha niskelet aruma. The rabbis say, no, we don't strip the women. Women don't get stripped at all. The women have their clothes on. The men, they strip them down. So we're going to have a whole to-do about this machloket. What's the sur? Who says what? Why did they say, who says what we got? Why does each one say that? And then we're going to you might remember this from Sotah, because we learned this already in Sotah, for those who learned Sotah. And now we're going to go say that their opinions are the exact opposite when it comes to Sotah. Okay? So that's your sneak preview of where we're going to go with this. Tanu Rabbanan. So the Braita says, right, the first thing the Gemara does is quote a Braita, which is similar to the Mishnah, quotes the two opinions, but has a little bit more. Lots of times the Gemara likes to do that, bring the Braita because they expand more than the Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanan, it's actually a Tosefta. Ha'ish mechasino to perek milefanav, va'isha shnei prakim. Okay, the man gets covered up in one area, and the woman in two areas. Bein milefanav, bein lachareha. Okay, both in the front and the back. Mipnei shekula erva, because she has more things that need covering than the man. Okay, this is quite obvious. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Chachamim omrim ha'ish niskal ha'hom ve'en ha'isha niskelet aruma. The rabbis say you don't need to cover them up because they don't get stripped at all, the women. My time, so that's so far is the same, other than we added one aspect, which is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, she needs to be covered up in two places and the man only in one. Besides the front and back, also two areas of her body. My time, Ayuda Rabbanan. What's the reason for the rabbis? Why do they think we don't, and we're not going to really hear the reason, but we are going to hear the pasuk and where he gets it from a drasha in the pasuk. And you can see when you see how they darshan this, it's clear that this is one of those cases where each one just read into the pasuk what his opinion was, because they're each kind of commenting on the same pasuk. Amar Krau are the same words. Viragmu oto. So it says in the pasuk, and they stone him. My oto. If you say him is just him and not her. Ilema oto velo ota. If you want to say that haktiv, it says in a different pasuk, votseta et ishahu et ishahi. Okay, which is you either take out the man or the woman. And it seems very clear that when there's a death penalty, it's going to be both for men and for women. So you can't say that when it said, and they stone him, that they only stone him and not her. But Ella, my oto, so why does it say they stoned him? It sounds like it's coming to limit something. Oto belok suto. It means him, they stone him, his body, meaning his naked body, without any friction, anything in between. Oto belok suto. Now here comes the drasha. That doesn't have to do with women yet, right? We said oto is everybody, but now they say no. Oto biksuto, right? Oto belok suto. Ha ota biksuta. But because the word that came to say, but not with clothing on, was specifically in the masculine form, we're going to say that drasha is only true for men and not for women. And that's why Chachamim say the women keep their clothes on. Again, obviously what's motivating the rabbis is he didn't think it was appropriate to humiliate women in that way. Or maybe he was worried, we're going to talk about, people standing around seeing naked women. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Oto belok suto, lo shnaish, lo shnaisha. So he darshans the exact same thing. Oto means Oto belok suto, without his clothing. But the Oto, as we all know in Hebrew, the Hebrew language, or if you don't know, I'll tell you, the Hebrew language is always in the masculine, which includes the women as well. So just like Oto is just like before, it's the man or the woman gets stoned. When it says Ragmo Oto, they mean whoever's getting stoned, whether it be man, whether it be woman. And therefore, the women also have this halacha. So they both darshan it the same way. It's just one said Oto is specifically men, not women. And one says Oto means including the women. And again, we've seen this kind of drashot, kol ha'ezrach. Does that mean yes, women, not women, right? And they go in different places. They go different ways because, again, this could make you look and say this whole world of drasha is silly, but instead, the better way to understand it is that often they knew the halacha and each one had a position based on a reason, and they're just trying to find some sort of allusion to this in the psukim. Okay, and that's the better way to understand it in a way that actually makes a lot of sense, especially here when they're both basically using the same word and saying the opposite. Now comes the big pasuk. Lememra, are we to say, now here the Gemara is being very clear that they don't really believe that it all came from the drasha, but there's something behind it, which is what? Lememra de Rabbanan chayish lehurhura, but Rabbi Yehuda lo chayish lehurhura. It sounds like the rabbis are concerned that if we have naked women being stoned and people are standing watching, then that's going to cause hirhurim, right? It's going to cause people to have bad thoughts and think about women and all that. Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned for that. Okay, it sounds that way. Now, if that's the case, we actually see the reverse. Ditnan. In Sotah, what does it say in the Mishna? HaKohen ochez bibgadeha. Okay, as part of the process of bringing the Sotah woman to drink the water, the Kohen grabs her clothes, like from the neck. Im nikreu nikreu, im nifremu nifremu. If they tear, they tear. If they, right, nifremu and nikreu, I don't remember if there's a real difference, but basically if the clothes start tearing apart, it's fine. Ad shemegale liba, until her heart is revealed. Okay, in other words, even to that extent. Visoteret tzara, and he unties her hair, meaning he takes off her hair covering, possibly if her hair was tied, he unties it. Okay, this is all to humiliate the woman. And what do you see here? This is the rabbi's position. In a second, you're going to hear Rabbi Yehuda. And what do you see here? The rabbis aren't concerned with her clothes being stripped off of her. And in our Mishnah, the rabbi said, we don't strip her clothes. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, imaya liban na'eh, lo haya megaleu, v'imaya sara na'eh, lo haya sotro. Now, it's clear here, if we talk about, there's two issues going on. One is, do we want to humiliate this woman more or not humiliate her more? That's one issue. It's the other issue is, what about the bystanders? Are we worried about what they're going to think? So if we focus right now, we're worried about what the bystanders are going to think. Now, in this case, Rabbi Yehuda says, because how is it clear that that's the issue? Because he says, if she's beautiful, okay, now who determines beautiful? Not, right? Okay, but if her hair was beautiful, if her chest was beautiful, okay, whatever wherever the range of that is going to be, then they won't do it because that's going to cause lewd thoughts. So now Rabbi Yehuda is concerned for that. Now in our Mishnah, he's not concerned for that. So what we're going to have to do is differentiate between the woman who's going to drink the Sotah waters and the woman who's going to get stoned. And the basic difference is going to be, according to all the answers we're going to have, okay, we now have two contradictions, Rabbi Yehuda, the rabbis to the rabbis, in other words, their position in each place. The main difference is the woman who's going to be stoned is going to be stoned right now. The Sotah woman who drinks the water, if you don't remember or you never learned it, so we'll go over it, what happens. There's a woman who was the husband suspects her of having something to do with this other man, and he warns her, and he says, do not go into a room alone with him. And if witnesses see that she went into the room alone with this man, there's concern that something more transpired there, and we bring her to the temple. Now, she drinks the Sotah waters to determine, now, you have to remember, no matter what, she did something that wasn't right, okay? But it's not clear she's actually going to die. She drinks the Sotah waters, and they determine, right there, that's going to be the determining factor about whether she was innocent or guilty, okay? And then, right, so I just want to point out, even if she's innocent, she still wasn't exactly behaving appropriately, but she may not have actually slept with the man. So she's supposed to die. Her belly's going to explode. You might remember that we learned if she has zchuyot, she has merits, it actually sometimes might push off her death and she might not die immediately. So she's not going to die immediately or not necessarily going to die immediately. So she might, but she might not. And that's going to be a determining issue here. So Amar Rabba, Hatam Haynu Tama Shema Tetzemi Beitin Zaka'a V'Yitgeru Bar Perchei Kuna. What's the concern? She might walk out alive, Rabba says. And if she walks out alive because she's innocent, then the young Kohanim that are standing around watching might want to lust after her. So, but in our case, this woman's about to get stoned. So we don't really care about what thoughts people have about her because she'll be dead in 2 minutes. Now you might say, but maybe it'll cause them to have thoughts about other women. Remember the whole thing we just learned not recently with Izebel, how she put up these statues, or died, whatever you would call them, but fake women up there to get her husband interested in her. So it could be it'll make them think of someone else. No, Amarabba, Gemiri, Ein Yetzirah Sholet Ela B'Mishay Navrot. Okay, the Yetzer Hara doesn't really, maybe they'll have some thoughts, but it's not going to cause them to do anything. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, only really comes with what a person sees. So it's not going to make them think about doing something with somebody else. So that's Rabba. So Rabba resolves which problem? Rabbi Yehuda. He explains Rabbi Yehuda as saying, our case, we strip the woman because she's about to be killed, and there's no concern for these hirhurim. Whereas in the Sotah case, there is concern because she might walk out alive. Now comes Rava, not Rabba, Rava. Okay, right? He's the next generation after Rabba, and often they converse, but it's not clear, right? It sounds like he's talking straight to him, or maybe just about his opinion. He says, I'm a Rava, de Rabbi Yehuda kasha, de Rabbanan lo kasha. Wait. So you resolve Rabbi Yehuda, what? Do you not think the rabbis contradict each other? The rabbis also contradict each other because they say opposite things in each place. So Ella, so it's a very nice answer, but you didn't resolve the whole problem. So comes Rava and resolves it himself. Besides being critical of Rabba, he, instead of just saying, well, you have no resolution and leave it at that, no, he said, you have no resolution, I'll bring you a resolution. Ella Amarava. To Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha kiddushanim. Okay, I got what you said about Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, we're good with that. But what about Rabbanan? De Rabbanan nami lo kasha. It's also not difficult. Why? Amar kra v'nivasru kol anashim v'lo te'asena kazimatchem. This is a pasuk in Yechezkel, and it's saying God's going to get rid of zimav, licentious behavior in the nation, and yivasru milashon musar. All the women will take note and will learn from this. And they will not do like the people did. Okay, there will be like a big scene where everybody will see and everyone will say, "Oh wow, I'm not going to do that again." Haha. So now, okay, so what does that mean? When the Sotah woman situation happens, which again, we said, whether she gets killed or not, it doesn't really matter because she's already done something not appropriate. So what we want to do is we want to make a big scene here and make everybody realize that they should take this to heart and not do this themselves. So therefore, what do they say? They say, we're going to strip her naked so that it's humiliating for her and that everybody around sees. So even if she doesn't die, she's still humiliated. And that will be a warning to all the other women that they shouldn't start doing things that are going to make their husbands jealous and then go against what their husband says and go into a room alone with a man to prevent this all from happening. Because again, it's the same thing. She might not die. And if she might not die, then people will say, oh, who cares? We could do this too. So they want to have something that's going to humiliate her in order for people to take note. But hacha, in the case of the skila, well, we also want to make a scene and we want people to realize not to do this. And in fact, we've talked about it in the Torah, it says a bunch of times, everyone will see and they'll know not to do this. Well, we don't need to strip the woman naked to do that. All we need to do is kill her. That's enough of right? Killing is quite strong and it's quite a noticeable thing that people will take note and not behave in that way. So again, both, and that's why I made a chart toward the bottom of the sheet, which is the bottom of the first side. Both think that the difference between skila and sotah has to do with the issue of skila, the woman's going to die, and in sotah, she's not necessarily going to die, but each take it to a different place. Will that cause hirhurim? Or do we not care about the hirhurim? We want to make a note so that people don't do this again. We're willing to kind of sacrifice that for a greater goal, but only when it's necessary and not when it's not necessary. And when it's not necessary, in the skila case, we don't do it. So very interesting machloket. We're not done though, because now they say, right? Maybe we should do both. Why only, right? If you say, we want people to see and take note, maybe we should humiliate her and kill her. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Rava, Amar Krab, Ahavta l'recha kamocha bror lo mitayafa. So Rav Nachman says, in the name of Rabbi Rava, we want to kill people in the nicest way possible. So we're not going to also humiliate you and also kill you if we don't need to. So now they say, wait a minute. So if that's what the rabbis are based on, and that's why the rabbis say the skila case, we're not going to strip her naked, then, and Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that. So lema de Rav Nachman tanaihi. So does that mean that that's the machloka between them? And Rabbi Yehuda doesn't care, kill her and have her be humiliated. To which they say, and then they don't like to think that when Rav Nachman said this bror lo mitayafa, it's also a concept that they believe in general. So it doesn't make sense to them that it would be a machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. So the Gemara says, and then therefore it's asked as a question. No, that's not the machloka between them. Because kule alma ile de Rav Nachman, you could say everyone agrees bror lo mitayafa. The question is, and here we're going to end this sugya, which is a really interesting question, which is what's the machloket? Not a question, but a debate between what's really at the root of the debate between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda. This is really the root of the machloket. Mar Savar, which is the rabbis hold, bizyone deinish adifa letfe minayche degufe. If we go with bror lo mitayafan, they both think bror lo mitayafan. We have to kill the person with the least, right, in the least painful way possible. So, or in the nicest way possible, again, if you can imagine such a thing. So, I mean, here you really see it. which is the rabbis hold bizyoni deinish. What's worse for them? Being humiliated by stripping them naked. For a woman to be stripped naked in front of everybody is the most humiliating thing, and that's worse for her. Adifale, meaning it's harder for her, it's stronger for her. From her. What's the issue here? There's two things at conflict. One is means we don't want to strip you because that's humiliating. On the other hand, we already said this statement before. It didn't come up in the Gemara, but we talked about it. The reason they strip you naked is so you die quickly. So now they say the following. The woman would rather die a little slower and not be humiliated in public by stripping her naked. And that's why the rabbis say we leave her clothes on, which means she'll die a little slower, but at least she won't be humiliated before her death. And Marsavar, Rabbi Yehuda holds, Naicha de gufe adifa mi bizyone. No, she'd rather die quickly. She doesn't care about the humiliation. Obviously, she cares, but not as much as she'd rather die quickly. So if you have to choose, right? And here there's a fascinating debate over what would you choose. You know, we could try to take a vote. What would you rather? Okay, try not to imagine this situation. I don't think you'd ever want to be there. But what would you prefer? Okay, and you can imagine some people would say that and some people would say that. And that's why we have this machloket. Now, obviously, I assume each of them is under the, is aware that not every woman is going to feel the exact same way. But they're going by what each one thinks most people would say. Most people would rather not get their clothes taken off, right? And they'd rather die a little slower. The other one said, no, most people would rather die quicker and they don't really care. I mean, they're going to be dead. So what do they care if they're stripped naked? Again, they care, but not as much as wanting to die quick. So it's a very interesting, right? So it's funny because if you think of the sugya, we started with very cut and dry, and here's what it says on the pasuk, and here's the drasha on the pasuk, but in the end, we really get to this idea of what's really behind this, and how much this humiliation and all that. So, Gita, you're pointing out about the return of the hostages, and watching actually, I was thinking a lot about the sugya in terms of the hostages, because what happened yesterday when they were taken out, there was this hordes and hordes of people. And I was thinking about it. It's a little, right, this idea of people all coming out to see. So it's not the same idea, but it's that vision of Kol Yisrael Yishmu v'yirau, and like making this a public spectacle, which is hard to imagine. And particularly, again, it's not at all the same situation, but I see it touched you in one place about the humiliation, and also it touched me in the place of just thinking of hordes of people coming out to see a spectacle. Anyway, yeah, it's where you take your what's going on and connect it. I see there was also one thing in the chat I wanted to relate to. Somebody wrote, let me just remember. The case of Abai and Chuma in the court where then he ran home to his wife. So that case is different, and I wanted to point out why it's different and maybe to just highlight something. So the story there, though, he comes home to his own wife, and it wasn't an issue of doing isur. This is saying the yetzer hara is only there when there's someone in front of you. It's not going to cause someone to sin and sleep with someone else's wife, for example. Okay, so that did arouse him, but not for that. And yes, of course, Carolina, also the whole scene was terrifying and scary. And I wasn't not talking about that. But besides the humiliation, it was also life-threatening. Anyway, it's something that's been sitting with me all day from yesterday. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next Mishnah. Beit HaSkila haya gavoa shte komot. So the skila, the place where they would kill the people in the house of the skila, was 2 komot high. So now one of the Edim would push the person. Okay, now I want to remind you, the pasuk says, Yad ha'edim tiyeh bo barishona, which means, right, and then Yad kol ha'am ba'achrona. And again, this is a very weird thing. And again, maybe if we think about yesterday's scene with the hostages, we talked about this already, and I mentioned that Shiur Mervis talks about it in Daf Mishalahem this week, about how theoretically the people are all supposed to be involved. But it's interesting, she talked about this earlier in the week, and it's so true that when you let the people get involved, things get out of hand. And you don't want a scene where everybody's trying to stone the person, right? It's scary, it's terrifying, and it could really get out of hand, which was what happened yesterday. Um, so you see that really um, they didn't want the people involved so much. They really removed it, and we're going to see that in the Gemara today. But the Adim really did have to be involved. And this is an interesting thing because the witnesses, I think there's two things going on here. Number one, if witnesses came forward and said this person, deserves to die, then they have to follow through with it because it number one prevents um it prevents Adim from witnesses from lying. Because you could go to court and lie and cause someone to get killed. You won't feel as bad because someone else will kill them. But if you're the one who has to be involved in killing them, you're going to think twice about, and one possible reason could be, that's why the Torah had it. Another possible reason is because they saw the action, so they should be the ones to you know to do the actual execution because they were the ones who actually saw it, and maybe there's some other element there. But anyway, we're going to see the two Adim are majorly involved. So how does it work? So this stoning house is 2 floors high. One witness comes, takes the person by their motnaim, their hips, and pushes him out of the house. Now, there's a bunch of different ways of understanding this. Some people just say, well, go with the opinion that says if he falls face first, then you turn him over, face down, then you turn the person over because it's not respectful for the person to be lying face down, or possibly some other reasons. I'm going to leave it pretty much at that, even though there's other ways of reading this. Im meit ba yatsa. If the person's already dead, you're done. That's all you need. But im lav hashini notel to evan v'notno alibo. If not, then the second witness comes and puts the stone on the person's heart. It's not pelting with stones like we would have thought. They take a stone. It was obviously a heavy stone. We're going to talk about that soon, and puts it on his heart. Im meit ba yatsa. If he dies, great. Im lav. If that doesn't work, then regimato b'chol Yisrael. And then we get into this pandemonium of all the Jewish people coming and stoning the person, which we definitely don't want to get to. How do we know this? And that's how they understand this pasuk. Now, you could have read this pasuk as the witnesses start and everyone joins, but the way the Mishna already tries to limit it by saying the people only join if the witnesses aren't successful. And the witnesses, one does the pushing, one does the stoning. Where we get pushing from, we're going to have to see, because stoning is obviously in the psukim. Never says pushing in the psukim, which we talked about a while back. So now the Gemara starts off with the Breita, Tana. The Breita says, "V'koma shelo harekan shalosh." So first we're going to talk about the height. Now, you assume, right, a one-story building is much higher than a person's height. But the way they seem to view this is maybe the houses were much shorter then, and they basically say we assume 1 floor is about the height of a person, which is 3 cubits. The average height of a person is 3 cubits. Then we have another 3 cubits of the second floor, and then we have the person's height, which adds another 3 cubits. So, koma shelo harekan shalosh, to which they say, so basically we have 3 cubits of the first, 3 cubits of the second, 3 cubits of the height of the person, because if you think about it, the person standing, it seems like they're standing at the top of the second floor, and you push them out, so their head is even higher than that, than the second floor. Umibi kule high. Why do you need to throw the person down from such a height? Because we learned in Bava Kama, ma bol sheyesh bo kedei la'amid asarat tvachim, af kol kedei la'amid asarat tvachim. What's the height for killing someone in a pit or anything, throwing someone down from a high place? Is 10 tvachim. That's what we assume. If you throw someone from 10 tvachim, they could die. So that's why if your pit is 10 tvachim deep, someone falls in, they could die, and therefore you're liable for the death if it was 10 tvachim deep, because that could have caused someone's death. 10 tvachim in amod, in cubits, so the 6 tvachim to a cubit. So it's it's 1 2/3 cubits. You're not even close to 9 cubits. Already at 1 2/3, you could get killed. So Amrav Nachman Amrav Ravua Amar Kra V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha Bror lo mitayafa. We're back to this based on V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. To love your. By the way, I didn't focus on that, but you have to love your fellow friend like yourself, which means when you're going to kill them, even when they're liable for death, they're still considered your friend. You have to treat them like you would want to be treated yourself. Have them die quickly. It's true if you dig a pit 1 2/3 cubits deep, someone might die, but they might not, and you want them to die quickly. You'd rather they just die from the impact of the fall, so we put them up higher, to which the Gemara asks, why don't we do it 20 cubits tall? If we go back to our sukkah and our heights of the sukkah, let's do it from a really tall place. We won't talk about there weren't like 3-story houses in those days. There were only 2-story houses. And I don't know what you're going to find that's that high. But let's say you could. Well, mishum demenavel. Well, that will be already a disgrace to the body because the body will go flying into pieces, and we don't want that to happen. Told you a bit of a graphic daf. Okay. So now one of them pushes. Where do we get this pushing from? Tanu Rabbanan, minayin shebitchiyah. So the Braita says, how do we know you have to push? Talmud lamal yalo. Okay, where are we? Well, right now we're in the psukim of Har Sinai. When they got to Har Sinai, God said, don't touch the mountain and don't go up on the mountain. And then it says, lo tigabo, don't touch it, because if you do, kisakol yisakel o yaro yiyare. And now we're going to darshan these words. You either are going to be stoned or you're going to be, well, yaro in modern Hebrew is to shoot. Obviously here they mean it to push, okay? Or you'll be pushed down. So they say, well, how do you know tchiyah? Because it says yaro. Now, this is clearly right now only talking about if somebody touches Har Sinai. Uminayin shebeskila, Talmud lamar sakol. Okay, so we have yaro to teach you about pushing. We have sakol to teach you about stoning. In that case, minayin shebeskila ubitchiyah. How do you know that the punishment is actually both? Talmud lamar sakol yisakel o yaro yirah. Now, o usually means or, but they're darshaning o as end. Okay. To which the Gemara says, how do you know that if the person dies first by the pushing, that that's enough? Talmud Lamar, o yaro yireh. Okay, then they actually darshan the o in both ways. O could be or, it's and, but it could be or, because if the person already was killed one way, then you don't need the other way. Minayin sha'af l'dorot, Ken. Now, how do you know that? Okay, now here's l'dorot. What is l'dorot? That forever you can't touch Har Sinai? No. They mean our case. Any case of stoning, this would be the case. How do you know? Talmud lamar sakol yisakel, the double language. Or also Rashi says it sounds like atid. You will be stoned. That in the future, when you're stoned, it's stoning and yaro yareh and pushing. Okay, and that's how we get to our halacha. Okay, we're now at the top of Amud Bet. V'im lav, we're back to the Mishnah. Eid sheni notela to Evan. So we're back to reading our line from the Mishnah. The second one takes the stone. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, no tail. The second one picks up the stone. How could the second one pick up the stone? V'hatanya, it says in a Braita, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Evan haytasham, there was an Evan always in this stoning house. Masui shnei b'nei adam. It could only be picked up by two, and that's going to be the problem. Has the Mishnah say one picks it up? If it's so heavy, it can only be picked up by two. The Braita continues, which actually is going to raise another problem, which is notla v'notna libo. So he picks it up. It doesn't say they pick it up. So even the Braita doesn't make sense. He picks it up and puts it on the person's heart. Imeit by yatsa. Okay, that's just like our Mishnah. If the person dies, they die. But the main thing that was in our Mishnah is that there was a stone there always in this house that was meant for stoning, and it was so heavy that only two people could lift it. So how does the Mishnah say one person lifts it? To which the Gemara responds, well, you're asking the question about from the Braita to the Mishnah. The Braita itself has a problem in it, as I mentioned. The Mishnah already said that that stone is put by one. The Braita itself said it's put by one person. Ela, it must be to resolve both the Braita and the Mishnah. In other words, basically, the Gemara is saying it's not a contradiction between the Braita and the Mishnah. Even the Braita in and of itself has a problem. So the only way to explain it is they both lift it together, but then one places it. And why does one place it? It's much more precise if one person puts it down. If two people put it on the person, it might go off. But one person controlling it is going to be much more precise, and they want it to be precise because they'd rather, right, they want to make sure the person dies at this point. They especially don't want all the people to get involved. So they do it like this. Okay, so again, both lift it and one places it on once it's lifted, because the hard part in the stone is the lifting. Once it's up, it's not as hard to take it and put it down. V'im lav rigimato, then it said, and if not, then everyone comes and gets involved. V'hatanya me'olam lo shana ba'adam. Okay, now here comes, if you didn't believe me, they quote a Braita that says, no way did this ever happen. People never got involved in the death and the killing. So why does the Mishnah mention it? They say, Mi kamina da'avid, di mitzrach kamina. I didn't say that they did it. I just said if it's needed, okay? But it's really not going to ever be needed, okay? And therefore, the people don't ever do this. So now, Amar Mar. Okay, I see you're asking, Becky. Everyone brought a stone with them. The whole point is they never happened. Okay, how they were supposed to do it is a good question, but where they were supposed to get stones from. Maybe there were also stones in them, but they didn't need it because that never happened. People always died because we're talking about a big, heavy stone. Imagine you put that on the heart of someone who just fell off, right? Who just got pushed off. Obviously, the person's going to die at that point. Amar Evan Haitan. Now we're going to learn about this stone. So the Bright had said there was this stone that was there that was very heavy. But wait, Vahatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita, Echat Evan Sheniskal ba, Ve'echat Eitz Shenitla ala, Ve'echad Saif Shnei Ragbo, Ve'echad Sudar Shenechnak bo, Kulam Nikbarim Imo. And we talked about all these things that they need, right? They need a tree for hanging. We're going to get to hanging at the end of today's daf. There was the stone that they used for stoning. There was the sword they used for killing and the hereg. There was the cloth they used for strangulation. So all these implements, whatever was used for that person, kulam nikbarim imo. They're buried with the person. So how could you say the stone was always there if they buried it with the person? If they killed someone by stoning, and there was always a stone there when they used it, and they had to bury it with the person, so then they replaced it. Okay, pretty simple. Nikbarim imo. Wait a minute. They were buried with him. Vahatanya, a different Braita says, "Ein nikbarim imo." Not buried with them. This is actually in the Tosefta. So Amar Rav Papa, my imo b'tfisato. What does it mean, imo? Imo means not. One Braita says it wasn't buried with him. One Braita says it was. What does it mean? One Braita says it wasn't buried with him. It was buried near him. B'tfisato means like 4 cubits away. Okay. In other words, they put it somewhere near, but not actually next to the person in the grave. Okay. Just again, this makes it sound like they were killing people all the time. But, right, I see Gita, you were writing about 70 years, not even every 70 years. They really didn't kill people in general, right? Saying, right, the Mishna we're going to get to that says if they killed once in 70 years, they were called ratzchanim, that even that they barely did. Okay, this was something, and in general, we're going to talk today about a whole bunch of things that rarely happened or maybe never at all. Amar Shmuel. Now we're getting into Shmuel, and this is going to open a whole sugya, which is going to take us till the next Mishnah, which is taking psukim literally, okay? And not just taking them literally, but more like if the pasuk says this is the way it's supposed to be, does it have to be that way? And what if it can't be that way? Does that mean we can't carry through? So Amar Shmuel, nikta'a yad ha'edim patur. If the witness testified and then their hand was cut off, okay, unfortunately, these are also visual things that are hard for us to visualize now with so many soldiers and other people with limbs missing. But nikta'a yada edim patur. If the hand gets cut off of the somehow he loses his hand in between, then patur. Then the person is exempt. Meaning we can't fulfill the pasuk as it says, yad ha'edim tiyeh bo barishona. The hand of the witnesses, because the witness now doesn't have a hand. So you're patur. My time, because we can't fulfill the pasuk as it says. So therefore, crazy thing, just because something happens to the hand of the witness, the person goes scot-free. Elameata. So now they're going to start questioning him from a bunch of places. First question. So what if witnesses started off, they didn't have hands? Okay, what? You're going to say it's no good? So they say, oh no, that would work, even according to Shmuel. Shanei hatam damakra yada edim shaitakva. Yad, the hand of the witnesses as it was when the person testified. If they didn't have a hand to begin with, it's fine. But if they had a hand to begin with and lost it after the testimony, and now when the punishment comes, then we can't fulfill it. Second question against Shmuel. Meitive. We're going to bring a contradiction from a Tanaitic source. We're assuming what we mean is the witnesses who testify that the person did the action, right? And they saw it, they witnessed it, they're the ones who have to kill. That is the way the pasuk reads. But yet it says here, if 2 people come and say in a court, let's say the convict ran away after he was convicted. And then 2 witnesses come and say, listen, we were in the court when they convicted this person. And now, right, Ploni and Ploni Edav. And so and so and so and so, Reuben and Shimon were the witnesses at the time. And we're testifying that we saw the judges say that this person's liable to death penalty. So since 2 witnesses are believed, this person is killed. Now, how could the person be killed? Because you can't do Yad Eidim Tiyeh B'Rishonah, we're somewhere else. Those witnesses aren't necessarily here. and then we can't fulfill the pasuk. So if Shmuel says you have to fulfill that pasuk, you're not fulfilling it here. Shmuel says, oh, this source would work only in the case where the witnesses who are now coming forward and saying he was convicted in this court were also the same witnesses who witnessed the event. And only then would it work according to Shmuel. So we've resolved that. Now we're going to question the whole concept of those who question Shmuel. And we're going to say, do you really need, oh, sorry, this is still against Shmuel, my mistake. We're still against Shmuel. Another question. Do you really need, and now we're going to quote from other. These were two situations that were from within our case, right? We asked about people who didn't have hands in the first place. And we asked about what if someone testifies that the case was, the person was convicted. But now we're going to talk from some other case. Do you really need to follow the pasuk exactly as it says? It says in a Braita, right? Oh, so the person will get killed because they're a murderer. From here you learn people get killed in the way that they're supposed to get killed, meaning whichever death penalty. Let's say whatever penalty they're supposed to get according to the Torah, whichever way they're supposed to get killed, they can't do it. They don't have the stone for stoning. They don't have whatever it might be. Here it says you can kill them anyway. Okay, you just take a different mita beitin. How do we know this? Talmud lamar motu ka'amakeh mikol makom. So because it says motu mat, the person will get killed. Sounds like the double language, right? No matter what, they're going to get killed. Okay, and here you see, you don't have to fulfill the pasuk exactly as it says. It said skila, you could do chenek. Okay, so shane hatam damar kram mot yumat. They say that's a special drasha on the pasuk there because of mot yumat, and therefore it's only about this issue. To which the Gemara says v'ligmar minei, but no. If you have one case where the Torah says something, so it should be a paradigm for everywhere else. So if it says here, you don't have to do it exactly the way it's written in the Torah, then it should apply also to Yada Edim, for example. Well, no. If you have it one time, yes. But if you have it two times, remember this concept? And some people say two would be the same as one and you need three. But here we're going to go with two. Mishum dehave rotzeach v'goel adam, okay, a murderer, and the issue we just discussed, and a goel adam, the relative, which we'll talk about in a minute, are shnei ktuvim habeim ke'echad. There are two psukim where we learn this exception to the rule. Kol shnei ktuvim habeim ke'echad em melamdim. And therefore, if it's said in two places, the same idea, we learn from there that just in these two places and nowhere else. If it said one, it means it's a paradigm for everywhere. If it says it twice, it means just here and nowhere else, and that resolves our issue with Shmuel. So Rotzeach Hadam around that we already described that you get killed in any way you want, and that's because of Mot Yumat. But Goel Adam Maihi, what's the case? Titania Goel Adam Yamit et HaRotzeach. If someone murdered someone, then the person, instead of Yad Edim in the Skila case, there specifically the relative implements executes the death penalty. Mitzvah b'goel adam u'minayin shem ein lo goel shebeitim mamidim lo goel. But what if there is no relative? How do you know it's a mitzvah for the relative to do it? But if there's no other relative, then right, even though the pasuk says goel adam yamit et harotzeach, but if there isn't, the beitim puts someone else in charge. How do we know that? Shneimar b'figo bo mikol makom. There's again a pasuk that we derive it from. So with that we resolve. It's just those two places. Everywhere else you really have to keep the way it is. Now we're going to start questioning the ones who questioned Shmuel. How could you even suggest that we don't have to fulfill things exactly as they are in the psukim? Let's take a ben sorer moreh. Again, another situation that never really happened. But if one of the parents doesn't have hands, can't speak, can't walk, blind, or deaf, we don't kill the son. Why? Shenemar vitafsubo. It says they grab him, and we take that literally, and not someone who can't grab because they don't have hands. V'lo gidmim. Hotziwoto. They take him out. If he can't walk, lo chigrim. Not people who can't walk. V'amru v'lo amim. They have to say to him. They have to say b'nei nuzeh to the court. They can't speak, then they can't. B'nei nuzeh. They have to point to him. You can't point to someone if you can't see them. V'lo sumim. Not if you're blind. This last one is a little strange. I know Shomei Abakolenu, he doesn't listen to us. They assume, how do you know he doesn't listen? Because you hear what he says. And if you can't hear him, then lo chershim. I think it's also just because it talks about Shmiya in the Pasuk, even though the Shmiya is the son listening. My time, Allah, mishum devinan krakadichtiv, doesn't this show the Pasuk, it has to be exactly as it says? Lo, shane hatam dekula krayateru. Now that's an exception to the rule, because that whole Pasuk was not necessary. Tashma, another case. another case that was probably rare that happened. Ein la rechov, ein na'aseit ir nidachat. Doesn't have a square, like a city square. Then rechov is usually a street. Here it means a rechava, like a big city center. Then it doesn't become an ir nidachat to Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva omer, ein la rechov, osim la rechov. Rabbi Akiva says if it doesn't have one, you create one. Ad kan lo pligi, but the machloka between them isn't about ela demar savar rechovad mi karbi and anu mar savar rechovad hashta nami kmi karadamya. Each one just says that you need, right? Each one says you need it. Just one means you need to have it from before, and one says you can create it now. Aval Irani Dachal is where the whole city worships idols. Aval de kule alma. Why do you need this public square? Because you need to bring all the rechush, all the property of the city, and burn it there. But kule alma be'inan krakadichtiv. Everybody says you need this public square. It's just a matter, can you create it now, or does it have to have been there? But everybody says if you don't have that, then it's not an irani dacha. And now, after we had all these questions against Shmuel, questions against those who question Shmuel, do you have to fill the psukim like they say, or do you not? Now they point out this whole thing, by the way, is a Tanaitic debate. Tanaihi, Titnan. And where does it all come from? The Mitzorah, or at least the source saying it's a Tanaitic debate. The Mitzorah, and the process of the Mitzorah, you have to put blood. You take the bird, you slaughter it, and you put the blood on the ear, on the right ear, on the right toe, and on the right finger. So, Ein lo bohen yad, bohen regel, ozen yimani. What if he doesn't have a right ear? He doesn't have a right toe. He doesn't have a right hand. Then ein lo tara ulamit. He cannot ever be purified, because this is the purification process for the leper. That's the opinion that takes the psukim literally. But Rabbi Eliezer omer noteno makomo v'yotzei. You put it where it should have been, and you go. And the guy can then go out. Rabbi Shimon omer noteno smolo v'yotzei. He says you can put it on the left side instead of the right. Okay. So there you see, some people thought it doesn't have to be exactly as it says, and some people did. Also a very interesting machlok. Okay, we're going to finish up now. Next Mishnah. Kol niskalim nitlim. Everybody who's stoned now gets hung. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Chachamim obrim eino nitle ela megadef oved avodah zarah. Only two of those who get stoned: the one who curses God and worships idols. Ha'ish tolino to klapei am, ha'isha paneh klapei etz. The man, they hang him with his face facing the people. The woman, they hang her with her face facing the tree, the wood. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Chachamim omrim ha'ish nitle ve'en ha'isha nitle. The rabbis say again, we don't hang the women. Just like we don't strip them, we also don't hang them. Amar lahem Rabbi Eliezer, v'alo Shimon ben Shatach tala nashim ba'Ashkelon. Remember Shimon ben Shatach, we talked about at the end of yesterday's daf. He hung all these witches in Ashkelon. So what do you see? He hung women. Isn't that proof that I'm right? To which Amrulo, the rabbi said, Shmonim nashim tala ve'ein danim shnayim b'yom echad. You can't prove to me anything from Shimon ben Shatach, because what he did was not within the law. Now, it doesn't mean he did the wrong thing, but it's what we call a hora'at sha'ah. Sometimes there's a need to do something outside the law. And what he did was outside the law. How can we prove it? And we're going to have a whole discussion about this in tomorrow's daf. That he judged more than two people to death in one day, and we don't do that. Now, you might remember we did say you can do it if they're all the same death. We're going to get to that in the Gemara tomorrow, so leave that aside. So now we basically have some machlokot between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. We're going to just start with the first debate. Tanu Rabbanan, the Braita says, "Behumat v'talita." This pasuk says, and the person is killed, and then he gets hung, and then it says, don't leave them hanging on the tree overnight. You have to bury them that day. That's going to be the topic of tomorrow. Ki kilalat Elohim taloi, because the way you can understand this, the way they're going to understand is kilalat Elohim is the one who cursed God. So the pasuk seems to be talking about someone who cursed God, at least according to the way they're darshaning it, as opposed to we'll go with that. Ma mekalel zesher b'skila, af kol sheb'skila. So therefore, comes Rabbi Eliezer and says, well, the person who curses God gets stoned. So it must be referring to all people who get stoned. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, Chachamim omrim, ma mekalel zeh shekafar b'ikar, af kol shekafar b'ikar. Someone who curses God is basically denying everything, meaning denying there's God's existence. Also, one who worships idols, so anything that's like it, like worshiping idols, but not other people who get stoned. And therefore, the only people who get hung are those two people. What's the root of the machloket? And this I'll leave for tomorrow. One darshan's klal and prat, and one darshan's riboy v'miut. You might remember we've discussed those two different approaches, and that will be the beginning of tomorrow's daf. So we'll stop here. We talked about, again, the first sugya was all about, do the women also get stripped before they get hung or not? We talked about this whole issue of brodo mitayafa, and we compared this to the Sotah and why it seems to be you have opposite positions there and what the differences are. Then we talked about how they kill the two witnesses and how they kill the sokel. And then we had this big machloket about, do we have to take things as literally as they appear in the psukim or not? And for that, we brought all sorts of other sources. By the way, all the psukim are on the study guide, so you can follow the psukim there. I should have mentioned it then. And there's also some charts to review some of the basics of what we did. And then we got to this issue of hanging, which is going to be the subject of the next stuff. And with that, wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and Nishma B'Sorot Tovot.